Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's a pleasure to be back here to see so many familiar faces on the dais and behind the dais. In the interest of time, I'm going to, as my predecessors have done, skip around in the prepared statement that I have submitted for the record. I sought in my statement to make three disparate but connected points. First, I wanted to deal, and Judge Webster talked a little bit about it, the increasing overlap in missions between CIA and FBI. Secondly, I wanted to talk a little bit about the way in which the statutory authority underlying the charter of the intelligence agencies needs to be changed to reflect the new reality, in my view, of involvement in terrorist operations that extend into the United States. And thirdly, I just wanted sort of out of the realm of all of the discussion of structural changes to just give you a feel for how public service is looked at in the educational institutions with which I'm involved, because I think we all recognize that there are lots of things that we have to do at the current time, but in the long term, it's going to be the appeal of government service to our best and brightest citizens that will help us solve these problems. First, as you know, and I have personal experience with this, as does, I think, Chairman Goss, the notion that intelligence work meant secret, overseas, and designed for the edification of policymakers exclusively no longer obtains. On the contrary, in counterterrorism operations, CIA increasingly has to be held to the evidentiary standard of the courtroom in terms of the quality of its reporting, because in the courtroom, a number of its findings may well be tested. Conversely, the FBI, one used to think of as almost exclusively involved in domestic law enforcement activity. And now, in the effort to combat terrorism, we are asking the Bureau to act before the perpetration of a terrorist act, rather than merely try to piece together what happened and who did it after the fact. In that sense, law enforcement is being challenged to meet the intelligence needs of policymakers to figure out in the advance of an event what needs to be done, as well as the prosecutors and the courts to whom they have always been bound, and over the broad range of challenges that a war on terrorism entails, rather than on a case-oriented basis, which has been their method before. This is a tall order of change for CIA and FBI, and in many ways represents the reworking of a lifetime of habits which will not happen overnight. Little wonder there has been so much talk of connecting the dots. Considering the traditional core missions of the agency and the FBI, there have heretofore been strong reasons in both agencies never to connect the dots between them. Grand jury secrecy and prosecutorial fiat limited what FBI agents could say to others about current cases, and need to know and the principle of compartmentation inhibited the intelligence agencies as well. In addition, the National Security Act of 1947 specifically prohibited, and as Judge Webster said, President Truman wanted some centralization of the intelligence information that was presented to him, but the history books show that he most clearly did not want to create another Gestapo, as he put it. And so in the 47 Act, CIA was specifically prohibited from exercising domestic law enforcement powers. And here is something to which I can speak from personal witness. FBI and CIA, up until the last several years, have a 55-year history of intense rivalry and suspicion to overcome. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover sought to strangle the fledgling CIA in its crib in 1947, sought to keep its authority to retain overseas deployments in Latin America, and to tightly constrain CIA collection and counterintelligence activities in the United States, even in the early days when there was a foreign nexus. As a junior clandestine services officer at CIA in the 1960s, I remember having to go through a single focal point at the FBI to obtain information, Mr. S.J. Papich. I'll never forget the name, and will always wonder if there was ever such a creature. In those days, it was hard to think of establishing a day-to-day working operational relationship. Well, those things have changed, of course. I applaud the efforts of Director Tenet and Director Mueller to break down the cultural differences between the two organizations and to have CIA analysts serve on detail at the FBI and vice versa. But it will take time. My second point was that, and we appear to be making some progress in this world. The USA Patriot Act required Attorney General guidelines, for example, to implement the grand jury testimony sharing that's to take place with intelligence officers. I gather those are out. I haven't had a chance to study them. Likewise, we're going through a process that eventually will sort out what will be the area of permitted operation of the FISA court. But I've argued in a academic journal last spring that I think this committee and other committees of the Congress will have to come to grips with the fact that the prohibition in the 47 Act against CIA exercising domestic law enforcement powers is no longer applicable. Seems to me that with CIA, for example, sitting at the elbow of domestic law enforcement and supplying intelligence information and expertise relating to the foreign provenance of terrorist planning and implementation, which we want it to do, what it has to do, as Judge Webster said, if we are to be successful in preventing future 9/11 attacks. This has got to be construed, or will be construed eventually in a court of law, to be domestic law enforcement activity, which is specifically prohibited, as I say, currently under the 1947 Act. So I think you have to take a look at that. Finally, let me take a moment to talk about what I encounter on the university campus. I was sorry to hear from my distinguished colleague, Lee Hamilton, that his contacts or his involvement with academics have uncovered a cynical vein in the atmosphere and in the attitudes of some academics in conveying their views on the intelligence community at the current time. I can't say I've run into that myself, but it's perhaps a different place. I think you would be proud of the response to the events of 9/11 that has taken place on the university campuses where I have the privilege of teaching, Princeton and the University of Virginia. I have students visiting me every day seeking help in getting their resumes to the intelligence community, law enforcement, and the armed services for summer jobs, internships, and permanent employment. I'm currently supervising 5 undergraduate theses on subjects relating to the war on terrorism, historical or prospective, and have had to turn down others. Indeed, one of my students is here today, I'm glad to say. And several of my students over the summer have begun the study of Arabic, are continuing it during this academic year, clearly as a response to the events of last year. And that's not an easy language to study, as you all know. What concerns me is that traditionally the United States government has been quite poor in capitalizing on this outburst of patriotic enthusiasm. I read the statistics of government being overwhelmed by the growth in interest and number of applications for employment in the post-9/11 involvement event in the national security area, and I can sympathize with the difficulty of sort of sorting through these numbers. They're drinking from a fire hose. However, to me, it is so important that we capitalize on the renewed interest in public service that that I see among American students. Every person on this committee is aware of the frightening statistics reflecting the eligibility for retirement of large numbers of current federal civil servants over the next 5 years, with no identifiable replacement cadre in the wings. I think, and perhaps these are just hobby horses, but I've had some experience with thinking through some of them, Washington should respond to this quiet crisis in 3 dramatic ways to take advantage of this post-9/11 interest in federal service. Radically increase the number of summer internships that are available for qualified students in the intelligence and law enforcement area. Now, these students obviously aren't going to be green as grass, able to help out in any material way with a lot of the problems that our current CIA and FBI officers are facing. But it is so important for them to get an idea of what this work is about. It's also important for government to be able to look over these fresh faces to see if they have what it takes to work in this area. And I think internships are a perfect answer to that. The implications of federal pay, I'm sure, have been brought to your attention constantly. Federal pay has fallen way behind pay in the private sector for our best students. Now, that's not to say that our ablest students who are interested in government service are going to be absolutely deterred from coming in, given that discrepancy. But frankly, recognize that with the rise in cost of university education and graduate school, it means that a good many have loans to pay off, and it is a discouraging factor. And finally, on a more general point, and I think we're all about this now, over a considerable period of time, several decades, I think, it has been customary for competitors for the highest office in the land to denigrate the federal service and denigrate the U.S. government in Washington. Frankly, this has had its impact on many of the students with which I'm involved. It's made them skeptics, and it has caused them to shy away from the federal service. Let me give you an example. Over a 5-year period, I have looked at the statistics related to the jobs that graduates of Princeton's Masters in Public Administration program migrate to after they've finished their degree. This is a 2-year degree, very intensive quantitative analysis, and one which is extremely well funded from the standpoint of students not having to pay much by way of tuition. This Master's in Public Administration is utilizable in the best and most practical way by giving your certificates to government. We're down around 20% of that graduating class of 63, who elect to go to work for the federal government or state, local, and municipal governments likewise. Does that mean that the rest are trucking off to Wall Street or the management consultancies? No. In many instances, they are preferring NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and international work, international consultancies to these jobs. So it isn't something that can be discussed entirely in the context of money. And I hope we're going to turn that around in our country. I think, as I say, there has been quite a patriotic response to the events of 9/11, but all of us have to work on the business of making government service in these critical areas even more attractive. Thank you.